The growing public support for banning assault weapons in the wake of recent mass shootings, especially among Democrats and independents. In this section, we will explore how the American public opinion on gun policy has changed over time, and how it varies by political party and ideology. We will focus on one of the most controversial and divisive proposals, banning assault-style weapons, such as the AR-15 rifle, which have been used in several high-profile mass shootings in recent years. According to various surveys conducted by Gallup, Pew Research Center, and other sources, a clear majority of Americans currently support banning assault-style weapons. However, this support has fluctuated over the past 3 decades, reaching a peak of 72% in 1989 and a low of 36% in 2011. The most recent polls show that support for an assault weapon ban has rebounded to around 60% or higher since 2016, following a series of deadly mass shootings in Orlando, Las Vegas, Parkland, El Paso, and elsewhere. However, this overall trend masks a significant and growing partisan divide on the issue. While Democrats and independents have consistently favored banning assault-style weapons by large margins, Republicans have become increasingly opposed to such a ban over time. In 1989, 50% of Republicans supported banning assault guns, compared with 82% of Democrats and 78% of independents. In 2022, only 20% of Republicans supported banning assault-style weapons, compared with 81% of Democrats and 64% of independents. This partisan gap reflects a broader ideological difference on gun policy and gun violence in general. Democrats tend to view gun violence as a very big problem for the country and believe that making it harder to legally obtain guns would lead to fewer mass shootings. Republicans tend to view gun violence as a less serious problem and believe that making it harder to legally obtain guns would have no effect or even increase mass shootings. These divergent perspectives shape how each party approaches the issue of banning assault-style weapons, which are often seen as symbols of either gun rights or gun violence by different segments of the public. The debate over banning assault-style weapons is likely to continue as long as mass shootings remain a frequent and tragic occurrence in the EU. While public support for such a ban is currently high, it is not clear whether it will translate into legislative action at the federal or state level. The political polarization on this issue makes it difficult to reach a consensus or compromise among lawmakers and interest groups. Moreover, there are legal and practical challenges involved in defining and enforcing an assault weapon ban, as well as potential constitutional challenges based on the Second Amendment. Therefore, while banning assault-style weapons may be popular among many Americans, it is not a simple or straightforward solution to the complex problem of gun violence in the EU. The legal challenges that state-level bans on assault weapons face from the Supreme Court ruling that established a historical test for gun restrictions. State-level bans on assault weapons are a controversial and contested form of gun control in the United States. While some states have enacted such bans to reduce the risk of mass shootings and gun violence, others have resisted or repealed them, arguing that they infringe on the constitutional right to bear arms. One of the main obstacles that state-level bans on assault weapons face is the possibility of being challenged and overturned in court. In 2023, the Supreme Court ruled in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, Inc. Bruin that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to carry a concealed handgun for self-defense outside the home. Although this case did not directly address assault weapons, it created a general test for evaluating the constitutionality of any gun restriction. According to this test, a gun regulation must be consistent with the nation's historical tradition and similar to regulations that existed at the time of the Constitution's ratification. This test poses a serious challenge for state-level bans on assault weapons, which are relatively modern inventions that did not exist in 1791 when the Constitution was adopted. Critics of these bans could argue that they are not historically rooted and therefore violate the Second Amendment. In fact, some lower courts have already used this reasoning to strike down state-level bans on assault weapons in California and Illinois. However, supporters of these bans could counter that the Supreme Court's test is not meant to be applied literally, but rather broadly and flexibly. They could point out that other dangerous weapons, such as machine guns and grenades, were also not regulated in 1791, but are widely accepted as subject to reasonable restrictions today. They could also cite evidence that some states did have laws limiting the types and quantities of firearms that individuals could own or carry in the 18th and 19th centuries. Moreover, they could argue that state-level bans on assault weapons are necessary and effective measures to protect public safety and prevent mass casualties, especially in light of the recent spate of shootings involving these weapons. Ultimately, the fate of state-level bans on assault weapons may depend on how the Supreme Court interprets and applies its own test in future cases. Until then, these bans will likely continue to face legal challenges and uncertainty. The federal assault weapons ban of 1994 was a landmark legislation that prohibited the manufacture and sale of certain semi-automatic firearms and large-capacity magazines for civilian use. The ban was signed into law by President Bill Clinton on September 13, 1994, as part of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994. The ban was motivated by several mass shootings that occurred in the late 1980s and early 1990s, such as the Stockton Schoolyard shooting, the Luby shooting, and the 101 California Street shooting. The ban aimed to reduce the availability and lethality of weapons that were commonly used in these crimes. However, the ban also faced strong opposition from gun rights advocates and Republicans in Congress, who argued that it violated the Second Amendment and was ineffective in preventing crime. The ban had a sunset provision that made it expire after 10 years, unless Congress renewed it. Several attempts to extend or reinstate the ban failed to pass in Congress, and the ban expired on September 13, 2004. The expiration of the ban was widely seen as a political victory for the gun lobby and a defeat for the gun control movement. Some analysts have argued that the ban had negative consequences for the Democratic Party, which championed it in 1994. According to this view, the ban alienated many moderate and conservative voters who valued gun rights, especially in rural and suburban areas. The ban also mobilized the gun rights base, which became more active and influential in supporting pro-gun candidates and opposing anti-gun ones. Some studies have suggested that the ban contributed to the loss of Democratic seats in Congress in the 1994 midterm elections, which gave Republicans control of both chambers for the first time in 40 years. The ban also affected the presidential elections of 1996 and 2000, in which Clinton and Al Gore faced criticism from gun rights groups and lost some key states with high gun ownership rates. On the other hand, some scholars have challenged the claim that the ban hurt the Democrats politically. They have pointed out that there were many other factors that influenced the electoral outcomes, such as economic conditions, scandals, media coverage, campaign strategies, and voter turnout. They have also argued that the impact of the ban vary across different regions and groups of voters, and that some Democrats benefited from supporting gun control measures. They have also noted that public opinion polls have consistently shown majority support for banning assault weapons and large-capacity magazines among Americans. The debate over the political effects of the ban continues to this day, as mass shootings remain a frequent and tragic occurrence in America. Some Democrats have called for renewing or expanding the ban, while some Republicans have opposed any new restrictions on guns. President Biden has recently urged Congress to pass a new assault weapons ban, citing evidence that it reduced mass shootings and fatalities when it was in effect. However, given the current polarization and gridlock in Washington, it is unlikely that such a legislation will pass anytime soon.